Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am the product manager for LabKey Sample Manager, Hannah Brackey, and will be leading this webinar. We will be accepting questions via the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and Will Bozoki, our marketing director, will help compile these questions to be answered at the end. We should have plenty of time at the end, but if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to respond via email. So as I mentioned, I'm one of the product managers here at LabKey, but prior to working here, I was a bench scientist for nearly 10 years. I worked in academia as well as nonprofits, primarily as an immunologist and data scientist. As someone who started out dissecting mosquitoes for malaria research and then collecting samples from different animal models and developing a program that received and processed human samples from phase 1 immunotherapy clinical trials, I've had my fair share of sample collection, processing, and analysis in the lab. When I joined LabKey, I was asked to share my experience with our team to help LabKey create and launch a new product, Sample Manager. For me, getting to be a vital part in designing a software solution that will actually help scientists perform work rather than hinder it has been a really exciting journey. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on LabKey. As some of you may know, LabKey has been building software for scientific data management needs for over 15 years. We started out as a proteomics data management tool at the Fred Hutch in Seattle. After a couple of years, the founders of LabKey understood how important it would be to create a standalone platform that would continue to grow and be supported. They continued expanding by creating a scalable, centralized data management tool for the SHARP consortium, capturing and integrating study data. LabKey then continued to improve the study module for ITN by providing the ability to publish and share de-identified clinical trial data. During this time, LabKey started supporting other scientific data types such as flow cytometry, NAB, Luminex, and other general assays. In 2015, we were contracted to expand functionality for the 100,000 Genomes Project to aggregate and secure clinical data gathered from multiple sites across the UK. In partnership with the O'Connor Lab at the University of Wisconsin, we began hosting a public portal for real-time data sharing during the Zika virus outbreak to improve data accessibility. We then launched our large molecule biologics development product with Just Biotherapeutics. About 2 years ago, we started to investigate options for developing a new product that would serve both current and prospective clients, LabKey Sample Manager. As you've heard and can see here, we partner with a large variety of groups across scientific disciplines, conveying the flexibility of our platform. We started our investigation for Sample Manager in 2018 and found that although there are many sample management solutions out there, current products tended to be hard to use, difficult to deploy and administer, lacked modern interfaces, and were cost prohibitive either at the time of purchase for enterprise level softwares or after adoptions when groups were trying to scale. As a scientist who works at a company that has a mission of helping teams overcome laboratory data management challenges, we're determined to create a product that did better. Something that focused on increasing efficiency in the lab, was easy to use, and had a low administrative and cost burden on our clients. LabKey Sample Manager is a cloud-based, built-to-purpose product designed to bring greater efficiency to sample processing while providing a unified view of your samples and data. To make the best product possible that was broadly applicable across scientific disciplines, we created a Sample Manager Product Advisory Council to help guide our decisions. Over a year later, these scientists continue to be highly engaged and provide sincere, valuable feedback about both the current functionality as well as upcoming features. So there are 3 key feature areas that we've developed for this product: sample definition or registration in the system, being able to connect experimental assay data to the registered samples, and assigning samples to a workflow job. By having all 3 of these tools in Sample Manager, the application can provide a single place for scientists, lab managers, and other team members to view processes and generated data associated with their samples. So I'm going to go through each of these features one by one. Our first topic is sample definition. Creating a centralized resource to define samples can boost efficiency and overall data integrity in the lab. Sample Manager allows for multiple methods of sample creation to fit the needs of your lab. Scientists can create a new sample by adding in a row manually, using our bulk create feature, or by uploading a sample manifest or other tabular file to register many samples at once. Sample Manager enforces a uniqueness constraint on sample IDs to help ensure that samples are distinct, avoiding downstream confusion about a sample. It helps save time during the registration process by automatically generating unique sample IDs using our naming pattern tool. In order to understand the context of how a sample was generated, Sample Manager also provides a mechanism to capture the lineage or hierarchy of samples. For example, if you receive a sample into the lab and immediately aliquot or process it, you can capture the original sample as well as the samples that have been derived from it. Additionally, scientists can quickly evaluate and interrogate the lineage graph to view how a sample was generated. Connecting assay data to samples is our second key feature and one that I believe brings something new to sample management software. To provide scientists with a comprehensive view of samples and their associated data, tabular assay data generated from samples can be uploaded into Sample Manager. Scientists can easily track and view what assay data has been created from a sample, decreasing the chance of running an experiment again, and also providing them with access to that previously generated data. Once multiple assay experiments of the same type are uploaded, Sample Manager automatically compiles this data into a single table, providing an easy mechanism for scientists to compare data across runs. Creating an application that was going to help scientists do their work was really important to our team, which is why we decided to create a task-based workflow tool. This tool allows managers and scientists to capture their lab procedures transparently, track their work quickly using job queues, and enhances collaboration through our notification and comment features. In Sample Manager, a workflow job is comprised of a set of defined tasks that are associated with a set of samples. Team members can create workflow jobs and assign tasks and due dates to scientists, providing a sense of collaboration and accountability in the lab. Jobs will also capture comments and support file upload for further customization and information about what happened during that job. Managers and teams can track the status of jobs and tasks, ensuring the right work is getting done at the right time. Workflow jobs will also show teams the samples and assay results related to that job, giving full transparency into the work. Scientists can always create an ad hoc workflow job to capture a given workflow for that day, but for more standardized lab procedures, managers and other administrators can create workflow templates for teams to reuse. Although we haven't yet called it out as a feature for Sample Manager, customizing the samples, assays, and workflow templates for your lab is important to making the application relevant for you and your team. Lab managers or other administrators can set up Sample Manager to capture the data that is most relevant for their labs. This includes customizing the fields captured in different sample types and experimental assay designs, as well as creating defined tasks and workflow templates. All of these data types follow a similar design interface, making administration easy to learn and adopt. In each of these designers, managers can enforce the data type of each field, as well as determining what fields are required versus optional. Scientists and team members can also be assigned one of three roles: reader, editor, or administrator. Readers have the most restricted role, where they can only view data in Sample Manager. Editors will be able to add, delete, and update samples, assay runs, and workflow jobs. And of course, administrators have the most permissions, with the ability to manage team members, define the structure of sample types, assay designs, and workflow jobs, as well as having the ability to view the audit log. LabKey Sample Manager has been built for labs operating in 21 CFR Part 11 compliant environments with password protected login, defined permissions roles, and detailed auditing of records. It's easy to track what was performed when by each team member. By using Sample Manager in conjunction with good laboratory practices, it will be easy to track and maintain good records in the case of an audit. So now that you've heard about how Sample Manager can help in your lab, it's time that I show you. So for my live demo today, I'm going to pretend I'm back in the lab, responsible for receiving our blood samples and generating the necessary data associated with those samples. In this lab, after the blood is received, we'll want to analyze the samples for complete blood count, chemistry, and nutrients, and upload that associated data. I'll switch over to our live demo. As teams enter the app, they have the option to view the dashboard, which gives an overview of everything that's happened or happening in the lab at a given time. If we start with the Dashboard Insights panel, we can see all of the sample types that have been registered here in my virtual lab, as well as the number of samples that are associated with each of those types. I can view the data for all time, or can toggle through and view in the last year, in the last month, or in the last week, where we only created one sample, or today, which I was preparing for this webinar and didn't have time to do anything. I can also create samples from this Dashboard Insight panel, or toggle to view assay runs in the same manner. Below, our panel is showing what assay data has been recently registered and uploaded into the system. This is sort of giving me an overview of all of the sample, all of the assays, but I can drill into certain assay types and import data directly from here as well. On the left-hand side, we have our jobs panel that allows me to start a new job, view my workflow queue that's assigned to me, filter by priority level. So if I only want to look at urgent things, it looks like I don't have anything urgent, but maybe I've got some medium priority tasks that I need to get done. Obviously, some of them are overdue at this point as well. I can also view all of the active jobs for the lab at a given time, or jump into the jobs home and view all of the information about the jobs. The dashboard is a really nice place to start performing work. We also have a menu navigation bar that stays with you throughout the app. This navigation bar gives us the overview of the sample types, assays, and workflows that are here, as well as each overview of these different groups. So if we jump into sample types, I can see these 6 or so sample types that we've created, as well as the description, who created them, and when they were last modified, as well as the sample count that we saw on the dashboard. I can also create a new sample type here if I have permissions. And we'll just pretend that I'm not collecting all animal or human-derived samples, and we'll create a new sample type called dirt. I can add a description here to let my team know what these samples are for. And I can alter the naming pattern of my generated IDs to something that's more relevant for these samples. So in this case, I want to call them all dirt samples with the date that they were created in the system, as well as the daily sample count that were generated that day. I can then customize the fields for my dirt sample type. We'll just go with things like mass, units, and date collected. And I can change the data types of these too. So I'd imagine mass is going to be a numeric value. Units we can keep as text, and date collected will change to a date time. I can make any of these fields required if I wanted. I can also expand these fields and add additional information, labels, import aliases, and validators. But for now, we'll just save this off. So if we jump back into our samples overview, I want to look at the blood sample type that we've created. When I'm in this overview page, I can create new samples, add them to assays, import, delete, or edit samples, or add them to different jobs. We can see out of the 5,001 samples that I have, it's displaying the first 20. I can toggle through, I can filter, sort, and search for samples that I want, and I can also export this sample type for further analysis. If I jump into a single sample, I'm going to see the sample overview page, which describes the metadata that was associated with this sample. So I can easily see that this is part of Project X, received by me and Lab B, and was a fairly normal blood tube upon receipt. If I'm interested in the samples that have been derived from this blood sample, I can go to the Lineage panel, where we can see that there's been, plasma and 3 PBMC samples and their associated DNA samples as well. And now, as I'm clicking through this Lineage graph, my right-hand panel of metadata is changing, describing what has happened to each of these samples. I can further continue to interrogate this. This would be particularly helpful if I was trying to track the lineage of a sample that might have been contaminated or needed to discard of all the samples that I've received from a certain blood sample. I can also view the assays that are associated with this sample, and it looks like our team has been busy and uploaded 3 different assay data types, so CBC, chemistry, and nutrients. I can import data directly on this sample here, or I could export it for further reporting or analysis. Lastly, I can view the jobs that are associated with this sample. So it looks like there are 2 workflow jobs that this sample is part of, both in progress with high priority. Neither have hit their due dates, but they're coming close, so I might want to talk to Rob and Molly and see if they plan to make progress on this work. And speaking of work that I should probably do, getting back to my scenario, I was meant to upload new samples that I received today. If we look at my blood manifest, I have the information that is described in the sample type here in the columns, and my project is my demo. So one thing I might want to make sure of before I try and import is that Will didn't import these samples for me this morning instead. And so I can actually filter through my blood samples, filter by project of my demo. And it looks like he hasn't done my work for me, so I still need to do it. So I'm going to go to the Create Blood Samples page, and rather than manually creating them, since I have a manifest, I'm going to import the samples from the file where I can drag and drop them, or I can just click through and select the file that's available to me. In Sample Manager, we're going to provide you with a preview of the file so you know what type of file that you uploaded, make sure that it's the right one. In this case it is, so I'm going to select Import. And I've successfully imported these 20 new samples. Now, some of you might have noticed that my manifest wasn't actually complete. The receive date and receiving operator are empty. I could go back and update that manifest and re-upload those samples, or in this case, I'm just going to choose to select those first 20 samples and bulk edit them. So I'll go to Manage, Edit Selected Samples in Bulk. I'm going to enable editing my received date, choose Today, and the receiving operator make that myself. Now the rest of the data has been maintained while we've just added this information about the receive date and the operator. As you can recall, my next task is to assign these samples to a workflow job. So I'm going to select them here and start a job with these selected samples. Now, if I was doing something sort of as a one-off experiment, I could start creating my job details and define the tasks with these samples. Or in this case, I'm actually going to choose a job template. And I know that what I want to do is use the template that performs blood analyses. So I'll choose this template. I can still fill out information about the job detail. So a job name today, I'm going to actually name it, but if I chose to leave it blank, Sample Manager would create a job name for me. I can add a description. And then also sort of indicate to the team where these samples are located at the beginning of the job and then at the end. So maybe I have set them on bench 1 before I go to lunch. And ideally, I'd like folks to leave them on bench 2 at the end. I'll assign myself as the job owner. And I'm going to notify Will so he knows that I'm getting this work done today. I can assign myself job start and due dates. And also the priority level. We'll say this is high. Because I used a job template, my job tasks and assays associated with them are already defined. We'll pretend that I actually did this first receipt of the blood tubes, but really I don't want to do the rest of this work after this webinar, so I'm going to give it to somebody else. We'll give it to Rob. And this will then show up in his job queue. I can also look at the samples, excuse me, the samples that I've assigned here, make sure those are the right ones. And if I had any additional information like pictures of the tubes or templates, protocols, that kind of thing, I could add them to the job so Rob would know what I really wanted him to do here. If I finish creating this job, it'll bring me to the job overview page where we can see the metadata that I attached to this job. These are all editable. Or I can start going through and completing the work. I can complete the task from this page, or I can drill in on a certain task, change the task owner, or leave comments for people to know what happened. If I complete this task, the next task is assigned to Rob. And so what I'm actually going to do is pretend to be Rob for a minute so you can see what his workflow looks like. And you can see if I'm Rob, I now have some work in my queue from my demo. Drill into that job. See that my first task is to aliquot these blood samples. I can complete the task again just here or drill in specifically. I can select the task and import data directly from here. Again, I can create my own assay ID if I have a standard naming procedure, or I can let LabKey generate the ID for me. I can make a comment. And then these defined fields are run level fields. So what is associated with all of the results that I'm about to import? So the operator in this case would be Rob. I'm going to pretend we have instrument 2 here, and then this run date would be today. I can upload a file directly or copy and paste or enter the data into a grid. I have a pre-calculated file that we'll just add here as my CBC run and select import. And this I actually had a feeling was going to happen. So Sample Manager will also not let you import data that is not associated with registered samples. So one of the things that I did this morning was create different sample IDs than what these files had. So instead, what I need to do is go back, look at the sample IDs that we created, change my file, or manually import them. For now, I'm just going to cancel. I'll stop pretending to be Rob. We'll go back to my page. And in this case now, if I refresh my page, I can see that Rob has started to do his work. So I can check back in later and see if he's managed to fix the sample registration. Or if I actually want to start looking at assay data, I can go back to the dashboard, or I can navigate through the menu navigation. Maybe I want to look at some CBC data. This assay overview tells me all of the runs that have been imported for this assay design. I can import data, I can delete runs if I needed to. I can also go directly into the results where all of my runs are compiled. I can then filter, sort, search for all types of things and export for reporting and downstream analysis as needed. So as you've seen, the three key components of LabKey Sample Manager have been built out to enable sample definition and capturing lineage, assay upload, and assigning samples to a workflow job. Sample Manager is available for purchase with our early adopter pricing starting today. As with all LabKey offerings, this includes unlimited user seats and online support services. This product will standardly come hosted by LabKey, eliminating the need for internal IT support. And because we're hosting, we'll also take care of regular maintenance and updates to ensure that you get the latest features. In the coming months, we plan to build out several new features to enhance Sample Manager even further. Sources create a top level of hierarchy that will allow groups to define information about the origin of their samples. Controlled vocabulary enables a definition of common language for users so data can be easily searched and matched. And our freezer management solution will link to registered samples and allow users to follow them completely throughout the laboratory lifecycle. There are lots more features and functionality to come, and our team is really excited to learn from you and hear what's important to your teams. As you saw in the beginning, LabKey prefers to listen to scientists' needs rather than dictate them, and we're eager to continue growing this product with partnership and feedback from you. If you're interested in learning more about LabKey Sample Manager, keep an eye out on your inbox. We'll send you a link to explore Sample Manager as you saw today, as well as a link to schedule a meeting with our team and a copy of this webinar recording. You can also visit labkey.com and sign up for instant access to test out Sample Manager or contact us for more information. And so with that, we'll jump into questions. So we've got a question of, is the specimen ID that is assigned by the system unique to just one lab? And the answer is yes. So at least for now, Sample Manager is really designed to handle single lab groups right now. And especially as you saw in our permissions modeling, we have this one application that serves one lab. Of course, because we have the ability to overwrite naming expressions, if you wanted to share data between labs, you would use something like a sample manifest or data export and import to share those sample IDs with your other labs. We have another question on barcode support. And so that's something that we're currently investigating right now. We'd really like to get it into the product, particularly once we start to launch the freezer management feature as well, because we do understand that it's a really important feature for a lot of you. We're just trying to come up with the best way to actually help support people do their work with these barcodes. We found that a lot of the other sample management applications tend to have fiddly UIs with that, and so we're looking actually at integration options potentially with Bartender at this point. And we have another question of that there's no inventory feature within Sample Manager and no volume tracking as the sample is being consumed in the workflow, and that's correct. So at this point, before we have freezer management, we will not be tracking volume sort of automatically through the system, although you can always custom configure your fields to track volume and to track freeze thaw cycles until that feature is released. So another question that we got is, when you define workflow job templates, does each job depend on the completion of the previous job? Or can you have multiple jobs start independently or configure which job is dependent on another job in the template? So I'll kind of answer these in a few different answers here. So the first one of whether or not each job is dependent on the completion of the previous job, that's something that we have as a feature that we would like to implement for 2020 as essentially connected workflow jobs. So if you want to set up your jobs that they need, one job needs to be finished before another one, that's something that we're going to look at enabling. But of course, we understand that a lot of other laboratories would prefer to do work concurrently, and so this would be an administrator setup that could be defined by the teams and what their workflow should be. And then, are the assays customizable? Absolutely. So all of the assays that we looked at today were customized and created by me. LabKey actually gives you the ability to create the assays and information that you want to capture rather than sort of us dictating standardized templates for you. So absolutely customizable. And then another question is, do you need another software to perform data analysis on the samples and generate reports? And our answer is right now, yes. Ideally, we're going to build in reporting tools and further downstream analysis into this application. But we really want to just focus on these core features first. And then sort of course, the next one being freezer management. But if you sign up with us, these are things that will eventually come over time. Oops. Scrolling on the wrong mouse here. So we've got another question from a LabKey server user that's familiar with the study module we talked about at the beginning. And if we can copy these assay results to a study. And the answer is yes, because the underlying data structures that LabKey Sample Manager sits on top of are LabKey server general purpose assay designs. And so if you have access to LabKey server as well as Sample Manager, you would be able to upload the assay results in Sample Manager, navigate into LabKey server, and copy those into a study. And if you have another question, which is great sort of from my failed demo of assay data import today, of what happens if you try and import a file that has a column name that doesn't match. So LabKey will effectively ignore this column at this point, which is why we're giving you that file preview feature to make sure that your column names are correct. We also have aliasing and other ways. So if maybe a lab that you're receiving samples from has volume as one column name, and a second lab is using vol or something else or a different spelling, then you can associate those column aliases for when you're importing that data. Another question that we have again is sort of how to integrate with an existing LabKey installation. So as one of the previous slides said, for LabKey Sample Manager is going to be this hosted first product, although anybody who has a premium edition of LabKey Server Now will also get Sample Manager as an option for them to deploy, either if they host with us or are in their on-premise installations, and that will be available in the upcoming March major release. And do you have any support for tracking study visits where multiple samples of different types are collected from one subject at once and is necessary to be able to have that recorded? So we don't have a mechanism built in right now for tracking study visits, although one way to do that would be to enable a required column that is tracking those study visits for you. We are also coming out with the sample sources, which will be able to allow you to track what study these samples are being generated from, or participant, something like that. And that should be upcoming in the next month or so. Another question is whether or not you own your data. Absolutely. So if you choose to end your description, you can absolutely export the data. We can provide you with an export of the data, but it is 100% yours. All that we're trying to do in terms of hosting is be able to support you so you don't have to go through a lot of IT rigmarole to use this application. Another question that we have is on customized import integrity checks. And absolutely, so one of the components that we did not go over today is creating data validators on these customized fields. And so if you wanted to ensure that the data ranges were correct or the text, that kind of thing, was in a certain format, you can customize that yourself. We'll also make that easier in our upcoming releases with controlled vocabulary, where you can then enforce controlled vocabulary around text imports for users. And one other question that I skipped at the beginning is whether or not this handles replicates. I would assume this person is talking about sort of sample replicates, and the answer could be yes or no, depending on if you wanted it to be, right? So the idea of Sample Manager is that every sample ID is unique, and so I can't have two samples named A. However, if I wanted to capture that sample A had a replicate, then I would have it be labeled sample A-1 and sample A-2 to indicate that the replicate existed. And that would really depend on the business logic of the institution that you're at. Another question is, will privacy be maintained in terms of hosting? Absolutely. So the terms and agreements that we will set up with your institution is, again, your data is your data. The only reason that we would ever access your system is for regular maintenance and upgrades. And so privacy is absolutely maintained, although I will say we are not providing this service yet in a HIPAA compliant environment. So if there's a need to store PHI, that would be a conversation that we'd want to have with you, and maybe one of our other products is the better fit. And the Sample Manager track reagents, vendor batch number, etc. At this time, we don't have a custom feature to track reagents, although when we come out with something like controlled vocabulary, that might be a mechanism to do that, and then eventually we will build out a full inventory tool. And yes, the presentation will be available after this webinar ends. Check your inbox and you'll be receiving a copy of that webinar. Yes, so the potential for integration with Bartender, of course, this would be an option for labs. It doesn't have to be a requirement to use the software. We're definitely sort of continuing to investigate those options, and again, to keep this as affordable for groups as possible. Oh, I keep using the wrong mouse. Take this mouse. Okay, and another question that we have is, do the samples have an audit trail for chain of custody? And absolutely. So right now we have the auditing tool that allows you to look at what's happened to each row at a time. The sample-specific chain of custody is actually something that we're working on designing and implementing now that will allow you to get a sort of one-page view of everything that happened to a given sample at a given time. As you can imagine, most audit logs are a little bit arduous to search for, and so although we provide that information, we definitely want to make that easier for users. And there are multiple types of data export formats. So we have CSV, TSV, and Excel right now. And a couple more questions here as we're wrapping up. How do I get my existing data into the system? So LabKey Sample Manager has really been built to make it easy for people to import data into the system. Of course, if there are certain migration services that are needed, depending on the size, that's a conversation that we can always have, but we don't anticipate many users having problems getting clean data into the system. And I think that's it for the questions. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing from you.